problems that innovations are trying to solve, especially for people and planet, are running faster than the solutions that we are creating.
While we are seeing very sophisticated innovation in telecommunication or mobility, we are not seeing same level of innovation coming to market in, say, drinking water or sanitation.
Most smart people in India are solving for groceries reaching us less than 10 minutes than solving for tuberculosis.
Value creation becomes more important in this market. Innovators need to understand that their product will never be successful in the market if they cannot demonstrate value to their customers.
I'm thinking of all the people who are listening to us sing. They're thinking software, chat GPT. But there is innovation at a very physical, material, science level as well, which is an extremely important force multiplier for solving for things.
It is about competing with poverty and competing with climate change. How do you create competitive advantage against poverty and climate change? Through full stack. So what Steve Jobs and Elon Musk have done, we have to do exactly that for the poor and planet right now.
Today, all the data tells us that the innovation investments in CSR have been very low. Like we're talking about 0.3% of all CSR money being spent on innovation.
Innovation is unpredictable, right? It's risk-taking and it requires a lot of trust. Historically, we have been trained in thinking binary and we have to start thinking spectrum. It's not black and white. There are multiple colors. The risk management models that investment community uses need to be recalibrated, redefined for development sector.
Welcome to Decoding Impact from Sattva Knowledge Institute, hosted by me, Rathish Balakrishnan, where we look at complex social problems and understand what it takes to solve them at scale and systematically. It's fair to say that there is a general zeitgeist of innovation and entrepreneurship in India today. More than any other time in my living memory, there are more entrepreneurs and more innovators that are trying to solve a wide range of problems in India. There has been a 300-fold increase in innovation investments in India, and India is actually the third largest innovation ecosystem worldwide. And there is today tailwinds in terms of governments investing in innovation, CSR law supporting investments in education, high net worth individuals and families investing in innovation ecosystems as well. However, it is fair to say that the problems that innovations are trying to solve, especially for people and planet, are running faster than the solutions that we are creating. There is a need for a far higher and a far greater level of engagement and investment in problems that innovations are trying to solve in the social impact ecosystem. And a large part of it also ties back to unlocking capital that can solve for some of these challenges as well. In today's conversation, we are going to talk about what does the innovation ecosystem in India look like? What are the structures and mental models that define how we understand it? And the need for unlocking diverse types of capital that can help us solve this challenge. To discuss this, today we have with us Manoj Kumar, who is the founder of Social Alpha, a multi-stage innovation curation and venture development platform that has worked with over 300 startups. Having known Manoj personally, I know he spent a significant amount of time thinking about the structures behind the innovation ecosystem and truly what it takes to solve for innovation at scale in India. Manoj, thank you so much for joining us today for this conversation on innovation and unlocking capital for innovation at scale. Manoj, before I get on to the discussion itself, it would be great to hear from you your own journey. What brought you here and to this focus on innovation?
Rathish, thank you so much. My own journey, I have been a banker. I worked in software industry, have been entrepreneur, did private equity, mergers, acquisitions, leverage buyouts. But, over several years, the desire to work in development sector latently has been there, right? It was there and but never got prioritized, right? So very opportunistically at some point of time in your age you start, and I really compare this with the entrepreneurs who are starting at 20 something, that they are taking much higher risk than I took in my life, right? So I was I think about 10 years back this latent desire to work in development became very strong, and then I started talking to people, in my network. How can I add some value? What can I do? The last thing I had in my mind was I didn't want to say that, okay, I've done enough of corporate business world and now suddenly, I have this change in my, uh, philosophy and I want to now contribute or give back to the society. That was not the reason. It was just a very selfish, latent desire to do something. And then I said, okay, let me see what value I can add, right? And there are so many non-profits, NGOs in development sector, they are already doing great work. So there is no desire to do another non-profit or another NGO, no desire to compete with anyone. It's just that what can I contribute? So I started engaging with foundations, philanthropic organizations, NGOs, and started learning more on the ground that before even I talk about what value I can create, let me learn. So I spent few years, about 3 4 years, just exploring myself and exploring where I can add value. And my biggest learning in that phase was that our development sector needs little more innovation. We have dedicated people, we have organizations, we have great institutions working on the ground with communities. But if we could bring little more innovation to the sector, it would be something worthwhile trying. And that is what I can probably bring to the table, right? So yeah, that had been the journey, and then we started off bootstrapping it little bit, some experiments with bringing innovation, and that learning was even bigger because it was
Right.
not easy, right? The gap between where innovation originates and where it is deployed, that gap is really really huge. And now we are learning, trying, iterating to see how we can bridge that gap. Yeah.
I want to come to that journey because many times, Manoj, people don't get a sense of the gaps in that journey today. And it's something that can span decades and years and not months. And I don't think we have that full sense of time. But before that, maybe just a framing question around what is different for innovation in the social sector as opposed to innovation in general? Because innovation is bandied about everywhere. But what would you say
Yes.
is the big difference in innovation social?
Yeah. You and I both are consumers of innovation, right? Every time we have a new phone, new gadget, new consumer goods. It's not a challenge to take innovation from lab to market because
Right.
if you see in the history of business since industrial revolution, we have seen innovation. They're starting with the steam engine to now we are talking about battery operated aeroplanes for local mobility, all kinds of stuff. So we have built vaccines and drugs and everything. So for me, where there is a market, right?
Hmm.
And there are players in that market, from innovators to capital providers to policymakers to the entire ecosystem that promotes innovation, right? So your higher education system, your R&D infrastructure, their innovation thrives, right? In India, where is innovation thriving? We have seen huge innovation in digital public goods. We have seen huge innovation in e-commerce, in last mile logistics. We have seen innovation in fintech, edtech, agri-tech. And globally, we have old classic examples of innovation, and we have seen innovation in services, in products, in deep science. But what happens to innovation in a market failure case, right? While we are seeing very sophisticated innovation in telecommunication or mobility, we are not seeing same level of innovation coming to market in, say, drinking water or sanitation or sewage treatment or getting small and marginal farmers sophisticated equipment which are affordable, reduce the treasury and improve their productivity and efficiency, right? Or diagnostic devices for last mile healthcare, which can be used by a frontline health worker, have great user experience, but are affordable and make healthcare more accessible, right? So that is where we see market failure. So for me, whether you call it social innovation or impact innovation, fundamentally you are addressing market failure, right? And when you address market failure, you then need to identify where all market failure is happening and what level of de-risking you have to do in order to attract the market. You are not going to replace markets, right? You are not an
Hmm.
alternative of the market, but you are trying to make this whole game more exciting and fun and therefore rewarding for people who operate in the market, right? So someone operating in ed tech or fintech or airlines or telecommunication or pharma, can we attract them to work in primary care? Can we attract them to work in horticulture, right? So yeah.
And I want to build on that market failure point, Manoj, because I remember once I was in a conversation where somebody said that more smart people in India are solving for groceries reaching us less than 10 minutes than
Yeah,
solving for tuberculosis, though
yeah.
the people dying of tuberculosis far more. But the question is, why does these market failures happen? Is it just a capital flow that today there is money to get you groceries under 10 minutes, but there is not enough money to get you a vaccine or a solution for tuberculosis?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ratish. See, who addresses market failure, right? It's the government, right?
Hmm.
So we pay tax and government uses taxpayers' money to address market failure. You remember like in 1950s, when India's private sector was not very evolved, we built public sector, right? Today we are even building airports and ports in private sector. But there was a time that Airport Authority of India would be the only player in airports, right? So we have moved from public sector to private sector because we had policies, infrastructure, capital, everything available for that, right?
Hmm.
Today, like you see, a government would play less and less in business, right? Earlier, state governments had their own PSUs, central government. We had National Textile Corporation in this country 30 years back, right? We have seen government playing the role of market maker when the market failure is there. But see, in today's context, government role, while it is really important, is going to be suboptimal because
Hmm.
we have large number of problems, and for a country of our size and number of problems, government while will continue to address market failure, we need new players, right?
Right.
And whether these players will come from mainstream finance world is a question mark, right? Now we also know that every investor in the market, whether it's an equity investor or a banker or a debt provider, will have their own cost of capital and risk reward equation, right? So
Correct.
their own investors would expect them to deliver a certain level of risk adjusted return on their capital, right?
Correct.
So expecting a mainstream venture capital to actually do something where risk is unknown, unexplored, and you are still working on very early stage innovation is something, I would say, it's not fair, right? Because a VC is responsible for their LPs for providing certain level of risk adjusted return, and they have a fiduciary responsibility to look after their LPs. So I think it's not only lack of capital flow, it's also not understanding the risk profile of those business
Hmm.
activities because we don't
Correct.
have enough historical data and evidence, right? So 30
Correct.
years back, nobody would do an airport or an airline or an oil exploration or refinery project. But today they do it because they understand the risk. And then the investors, once they understand the risk, they are willing to bring in the money, right? So if I do not think from a social or commercial point of view and just think
Hmm.
from a risk reward equation, a risk that I understand and evaluate is something that I can also underwrite if I have the capital, right?
Yeah.
So market is also waiting for enough evidence that they can actually earn their expected rate of return on their pool
Hmm.
of capital if they go to agri equipment market, right? Or they address climate change, or they address new battery chemistry, right? I don't think they understand that today, right? Do we understand that? No, but we are learning that, right? This whole social alpha experiment is the process of learning early stage risk in innovation, curation, and venture development. And at some point of time, we think that we can use a pool of capital to de-risk these companies and attract market, right? Our success is not dependent upon how much we do and how big portfolio we build. Our success is how much market capital we can redirect to sectors which
Yeah.
do not get market attention, right? 30 years back, nobody would have invested in a phone pay or Paytm. Today, people are investing and they're not talking about P&L. They are talking about growth and customer acquisition, right? So I think you remember microfinance is a classic example. 25 years back, microfinance was only done by NGOs, non-profits, right?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Today, today you see microfinance company getting mainstream valuations, right? Every big business wants to have, investor wants to have exposure in microfinance, right? Microfinance is no more starved of capital. So I think what we call today social innovation is a sector that has not received enough attention, right, other than government. And I think this is high time investors start looking at it. But in order to get investors to the sector, you need to do a lot of work in understanding and explaining the underlying risk.
I think you've hit the nail in my mind in the head, which is really this element of risk, right? And I maybe one level deeper in that, because innovation needs capital. Capital is one is quantum of capital, and other is the risk appetite of the capital. And
Correct.
as you rightly said, risk is two things. One is, do I know the risk, and is the risk too high? Sometimes I know the risk is too high, I still might take it. But if I don't even know what is the risk, then I
Mhm.
can't even take it, because otherwise I can't
Agree.
hedge that risk in any
Agree.
form. And
Agree.
I want to maybe share my thoughts on, Manoj, why is risk indeterminate, right? One, I've spoken to you before, innovations by themselves have a success rate that nobody can really capture. Will this work or not work? We don't know. So that is one
Yeah.
level of risk.
Yeah.
Second is, and this I wanted to understand from you, even the people that we build this for, their ability to pay, their ability to use, their ability to adopt, we don't know. So, if it's really built for India A, will I use grocery? At least we have heuristics to say, acha, ho jayega matlab. But for the people we are building, I don't think the markets really understand, listen, what is the adoption sort
Yeah.
of put probability, potential, etc., which is another risk that we are sort of carrying. And the third risk that we are carrying is the returns, the financial returns of any form, right? Is that valid, or are there other elements to this risk as well that you will say is important?
Yeah, it's really interesting conversation now because sometimes the fear of unknown is interpreted as high risk, right? Just
Yeah,
because
yeah,
I do not have ability to assess the risk, I would assume that it is high, right? So the perception of risk is not necessarily the real unless you iterate, do something about it, right? And second, the assumption that, for example, poor cannot pay, right? These assumptions are so. I used to think like that 10 years back, right? Poor cannot pay. Actually, you know, discarding a large population of the country by assuming that they are price sensitive is such a wrong assumption. People are not price sensitive. People are value sensitive, right? If you want to build a product for small and marginal farmers and you understand what problems they have, then you have to build a market appropriate product, right? Building a product that they can't afford and then blaming them for not being able to pay for it is not. These are the same people who borrow money to get their kids private education
yeah,
or private healthcare and get into indebtedness many times, right? During my learning phase, and which I continue to do right now when I go and meet the communities which we want to convert into market for our startups, they very clearly articulate what their problem is and what they actually give you specification of the solution they need. They may not use your language, they may not give it in your design thinking model, but they actually tell you what they need, and they are customers, right? In our sector, in development sector, we have never treated them as customers. One of the words you would have come across talking to people in the sector is beneficiary. The moment you treat them as the customer, even if it's a small amount of payment they are making for your product and service, your perception would change. Then you start thinking about their affordability and their user experience,
right,
right? Are they getting the right user experience? Is this agri-tech product going to reduce the drudgery of women who are working in the field, right?
correct.
Does it have the right design? Right? Is it lightweight? Does it consume less energy? The moment you start building products for your market and establish that what we call product market fit, right? Uh, you have a market there, right? So one, it's not about price; it's about value. Customers on the top of the pyramid are not sensitive to it because
Right,
I don't think someone buying a 1 crore rupee car is doing a value analysis because that person can buy another 2 crore rupee car. But
correct.
someone buying a 15,000 rupees equipment for agriculture will do value analysis because for that person, a 14,000 or a 16,000 actually is going to have impact on their cash flows and their business model, right? So value creation becomes more important in this market. And that is where innovators need to understand that their product will never be successful in the market if they cannot demonstrate value to their customers.
Yeah. And 10 years ago, Manoj, I was in XLRI, where there was a gentleman called Joe Madiat who founded Gram Vikas. And I remember him vividly saying that we just get along by building poor solutions for poor people and wonder why they don't get adopted. And
Absolutely.
that framing has just stayed with me because we just feel like,
Yeah.
and I'm, just saying it bluntly, saying तुम्हारी औकात के लिए ये काफी है, right?
Absolutely.
And
And
then,
it's criminal, right?
yeah, it
This is
is.
another level of injustice saying that you are not using my product, right? And now I will do behavior change for you, right? So there's this big industry that wants to change the behavior of the customer because their
Correct.
product doesn't fit them.
Correct.
I really feel sometimes really irritated about this whole thing of, you know, capacity building, behavior change, and beneficiary analysis kind of stuff. Because we need to treat people with respect, even if
Right.
they are poor. And if we treat them with respect, we develop products which have the right user experience and demonstrate value to them. I would totally agree with the statement that you made that make good product for everyone,
Yeah.
including poor.
Absolutely. Manoj, you speak to innovators every day. You see innovations, regularly. As you look back, are there certain characteristics for innovators and innovations that you think is a very good indicator for success? Like from what you're saying, humility, the willingness to listen, the ability to go on the ground and be able to have an actual conversation is probably the secret success. At least one of the characteristics that I see is important rather than sitting in a consulting room and saying, I'll make great PPTs to show how it will work. But are there other qualities that you see both on the innovator side or on the innovation side that you usually say, this is a good marker for success for us to solve this problem?
So all what you said is yes, they are all check boxes. But the two
Mm-hmm.
things I want to add.
Yeah.
One very important is the skin in the game. So I have seen the best of the innovators doing it with their own time and money and then raising capital,
Right.
right? And valuing their time and money and equity in the company, not diluting very early and not just giving away their equity to others, shows a lot of confidence in their idea. People in a hurry to raise a lot of money and taking pride in diluting their company versus people who take pride in their idea, product, and their customer discovery and building for the right customer, right? So they would be little more attached to their company and not in a hurry to dilute and raise money even if there is a need for early stage capital, right? The second thing is the best of the innovators are hands on. They build, test, pilot, iterate, sell, collect the money, go and check the after sales service, check with the customer. They are not our typical managers who want a team on day one and work with the people. So some of my best startups are very hands-on people. They know their stuff. Sometimes I struggle where, for example, innovator has only technology knowledge and they don't understand the business, or
Mm.
they have business knowledge but don't understand the technology. We struggle, and then we look for co-founders, right? As a team, do they have complementary skills?
Mm.
But usually, if it's a single founder, you will see their mavericks.
Excellent. And I want to build on the last point that you mentioned as well, Manoj, because today, interestingly, when you say innovation, and I'm thinking of all the people who are listening to us conversing, they're thinking software, chat GPT. They're thinking, digital models for doing things. But there is innovation at a very physical, material, science level as well, which I think is an extremely important force multiplier for solving for things. And again, I know you've worked a lot in that space where innovation is not just a software innovation, but there is a hardware innovation. Is there a sufficient talent pool in India that is looking at those innovations today, and do we have an ecosystem for it?
Yeah. It's a chicken and egg kind of situation, right? But let me give you a historical perspective. When we had our 1990s movement, services companies started in India, right? Infosys, Cognizant, all the success stories. Innovation was all around service model, right? Business
Mhm.
process optimization, right? And then this developed, when like engineering colleges started introducing IT, computer science in their core discipline more than electrical, mechanical, electronics, etc. Right? Then we had this second wave where internet, post-internet, right? When we saw how internet and app economy and emergence of smartphones started, you know, models like e-commerce and car booking and food delivery and all that. You saw next level of innovation there, right? Which was slightly higher in terms of value creation than just the IT services, right? And then this, international multinational companies started building their products in India. So people started understanding that, oh, there are companies around the world who don't do outsourcing of IT services, but they actually build products, right? And then sell the products and build an ecosystem around their products. And then we have our own homegrown companies, right? Like from Tally to Zero Corporation, building
Yeah.
products from India, Freshworks, great examples.
Yeah.
I think we are now at a stage where all this is mainstream now, right? So software, IT, digital, AI, data science, chat GPT, it's all mainstream, right? The next wave of entrepreneurship in India is going to be building products where there is a convergence of hardware, software, materials, etc. Right? So our we have two big crises in front of us, other than poverty, which is climate and health. Right?
Correct.
You need to build drugs, you need to build therapeutics, you need to build vaccines. You have to do some stuff, real, right? Physical stuff. You need to replace plastic. Software will not eat plastic,
Right.
right? You want to replace plastic, you need biodegradable new polymers, biopolymers, which behave like plastic because we are so used to using plastic. We need
Correct.
packaging, we need to replace thermocol, right? But thermocoal's replacement will not come from digital, right? So we have to start now thinking about new battery chemistry because we have lithium insecurity. We need better energy density. We need long duration energy storage. If you want to get away with the intermittency in solar and wind, then you need long duration energy storage, right? Otherwise, you will continue to use fossil fuel. You need new materials to replace so many things. As I said, plastic packaging material, etc. We have little water, so we need to recycle water.
Yeah.
At some point of time, we will create our own drinking water in our own house. Maybe we have water purifier today. Tomorrow we may have every apartment fitted with a circular water system. I don't know, but so, at some point of time, we have to solve some of these problems that we created for the planet.
Correct.
And you need material science innovation there, right? You need energy innovation, right? In healthcare, right? If we have to extend really high quality healthcare service to people in remote areas, telemedicine will only work, right? But nowadays you hear this digital health. Yeah, digital health will work, but health is not only about digital, it's also about tissues, it's also about blood and bone, right? It's also about fever and it's also about surgery. So there is a physical element to it, right? So you need diagnostic device, you need a
Mm.
sensor probably that is built into the bangles of a woman, right? And that communicates to you the hemoglobin level, right? So you have now this small device a lot of people have nowadays to do constant sugar monitoring. A
Yes.
lot of
Yes.
diabetic patients are now getting on their smartphone, right? This innovation can happen. I'm sure majority of our women in the rural India are anemic. Some kind of a device can be built to just monitor the hemoglobin level, for example.
Mm.
So what I'm saying that a lot of innovation will require these boundaries of software, hardware, material science. Everything has to be broken. You will use software and artificial intelligence in hardware optimization or designing better hardware. But I think the next wave of innovation that we are seeing now, we have a company in our portfolio that has built a 1.5 Tesla MRI machine. We have another
Mm.
company that has built a leather replacement using mycelium fungus, right? We have seen, we are evaluating a company that is creating microbe-based colors so that textile industry stops using chemical colors. You have a problem of effluent treatment or you have a problem of chemicals being used in textile. Maybe dyeing industry has to change. Dyeing industry needs to adopt biodegradability, right? Where will it come from? It will come from real, physical science world. Yeah. But the role
Mm.
of computer science and AI and data science will increase in this because you will do a lot of modeling, you will do optimization. So I think this whole software hardware thing it is over now. We have to think about creating solutions using whatever.
And you are seeing enough innovators who are able to think, imagine, do this today.
Yeah, they were hidden. They were
Ah,
hiding in government jobs, in CSIR labs, in ISRO, in IIT, IISC, right? So the moment they see, like yesterday, I was talking to a scientist, and she said she never knew that there is an organization that could help her take her solution from lab to market, and then we are working with her and finding out what kind of a business model will emerge 2 years down the line, right? I think we are at that point right now where a lot of people are showing interest. They are
right.
excited about it. We have some role models and case studies. uh, what we need now, and there is a policy framework right now, right? So it's that science and technology innovation is agenda at the state level, at the federal level, everywhere. So talent is there, policy framework is there. The missing piece is a new category of capital. The
Yeah.
the playbook that we have adopted in our venture capital world, that 10-year close-ended 220 model, will not work here. That playbook will not work here because it's a new way of doing things. It's a new time to market. The risk is different, right? Mortality rate is different. Capital structure has to be different, right? And the rewards are also very different. It's very non-linear, right? So if you invent the next diagnosis kit or the next battery, it's going to be very different reward for the entrepreneur as well, right? You will create huge impact and you will actually get financially rewarded. So that also, the impact versus, like 10 years back, people would ask me, okay, what do you think? Like, it's impact or profit, right? For profit or not for profit, right? Impact or commercial. These binaries are getting broken now. It's no
Yeah.
more, like in politics, no left and right. You have a spectrum, right?
Yeah.
In color, you always had a spectrum. So in
Correct.
non-profit, for-profit, this dichotomy that our law still recognizes, that if you are for-profit, you have one set of rules. If you are not for-profit, you have other set of rules. This is getting broken.
Yeah.
So the capital pools will also be different now. They will have to behave differently for different startups in their life cycle, depending upon what is the complexity of problem they are solving and what stage they are in. So stage appropriate capital, complexity appropriate capital, that kind of blending will happen.
Absolutely. Manoj, I want to summarize what we've spoken about so far because it sort of helps us navigate to the next phase more effectively. So, one, the kind of problems that we are facing, there are sufficient market failures that government cannot solve, where the need for innovation is critical. If we have to solve for health and education and agriculture, etc., it is not going to be by the hand of the government. It's going to be by innovation that is happening. I think what you highlighted is that there are tailwinds that are enabling that innovation. There is a policy framework right now. There is interest and momentum in making this happen, etc. But there are at least four challenges that we spoke about in this conversation. The first challenge is the mindset challenge, which is if you don't believe that everyone deserves a good solution, you will build poor solutions for poor people, and that is not going to help us drive innovation at all. Second is indeterminate risk. It is not high risk. It's a fact that the perception of risk, is indeterminate, and hence there is an unwillingness to unlock capital, resources, all of that to make it happen. The third is the capability mix. We are looking at solutions that combine material elements, that combines the digital elements, and so on. But then you understand business, then you have to understand teams. This combination of talent, as you said, is not it's not unavailable, but is hidden today. And there are pathways that need to be established for us to be able to understand. And then the fourth is the structural challenge. We have dichotomies and false choices: private, non-profit, impact or profit, etc. And what we are trying to create requires us to separate all these false choices and say, what is a new paradigm for us to think of these as ands than ors, impact and profit,
Yeah.
non-profit and for-profit structures, etc. That I think is going to be very important. That sort of leads me to the next part, where I want to talk to you a little bit more about what does this new capital structure look like. And I know you've spoken about a full stack architecture before. Why don't you tell us about it? What is this conceptualization of a full stack architecture for innovation?
So Ratish, when we started, right? Again, a lot of time we start with assumptions, right? So I thought capital is the only problem, right?
Yeah.
And I thought I'll raise money and invest in companies. Very oversimplified view of the sector. And then very quickly we learned that this is not the case. We have several incubators and accelerators working in this space, trying to provide different elements of success and support. The biggest learning was that from if you take an innovation from lab to community, that is basically the customer base, right? That needs the innovation. One, it has to go through the market. That means you need entrepreneurs, right?
Yeah.
Without entrepreneurs, innovation can happen in the high science laboratory. But taking innovation from lab to market requires entrepreneurs. And in the process, you are also creating the market, right? By showing them the revenue stream downstream, right? From the community which is using or paying for this. So a lot of work actually you have to do closer to the lab, closer to the R&D ecosystem, right?
Mm.
So what works in a lab environment is not necessarily ready for manufacturing, production, or even pilots, right? And that is what we in the industry we call it incubation, right? That getting companies to a stage where they can be ready to go to market. But that incubation piece has to happen closer to R&D, right? And a lot of testing in the sandbox and real environment has to happen there. And then once you are at a stage where this venture can even think about going to market, you probably need venture capital,
Right.
right? And when do you transition from that lab stage work that venture capital will not fund to a stage where venture capital is required will depend upon again complexity of the problem and what sector you are in. So it's not one size fits all rule,
Right.
right? And therefore it has to be highly customized for each and every innovation. So what will work
Mm.
for plastic is not necessarily what will work for battery chemistry, for example, or medical devices. While the playbooks, investment playbooks are designed for a homogeneous type of
Yeah.
B2B playbook,
Yeah.
B2C playbook. So this is not B2B, B2C. This is each and every scientific innovation is different, right?
Correct.
And then when you pilot or test, you may go back to the lab for another round of iteration,
Yeah.
right? So this build, test, iterate, rebuild process is tried and tested in the software industry. So anybody who worked in software industry knows that you don't ship your software on day one. We still get bugs on Microsoft Office, right? For 30 years we have been using it. So the software industry has actually figured out, therefore software companies get investment from the VCs. But the
Mm.
same level of sophistication or advancement in the hardware or materials or physical goods industry is not there yet. It
Right.
is there. I'm sure people who invented refrigerators and washing machines and water purifier would have done it for many years before we see a TV in our house. And phones keep iterating. Every year you get a new model with new features and new functions, right? And you never thought, oh, this is a good feature. They should have given it 3 years back. So in places where you are addressing problem of poverty and planet, right? Climate, agriculture, water, or healthcare, you need the same level of
Of course.
ecosystem and capital support that was available to durables or automobile companies, right? So, for example, if Indian Institute of Science develops a new molecule which has the potential of converting into a cancer drug, it will just license it to say a Novartis or a Pfizer or a Ross, and they will then their internal R&D will do the lab to market, right? So this lab to market actually happens in the corporation. A Boeing will have its own R&D, a Lockheed Martin will have its own R&D, Tata Motors or Reliance Petroleum will have their own R&D. So this lab to market piece in mainstream business happens in the market and not in the lab. And
Right.
every successful company has R&D budget, right? Who will do R&D for this planet, for climate change, for energy transition? Who will do R&D for that woman in Eastern UP who has 2 acre land and does not have an equipment that helps her improve her productivity on the field?
Right.
Who will do R&D for an ASHA worker who is going door to door collecting data and not being able to do a quick test on the spot and do a quick referral to the primary health center? So mainstream business has no incentive today to do R&D for people and planet. Where they had incentive, they are doing it. So, for example, mobility is getting enough investment. So, I'm sure if you, I have not done calculation, my guess is 80 to 90% of so-called climate investments are only in mobility, right? So where, but who will do other things, right? So since the transition between lab and market, since industrial revolution is very well defined, and it is through something which we call technology licensing regime. So you do R&D and license it out, and that's what most labs do. But when it comes to people and planet, there is nobody to license. So what people say, okay, I open source it at MAP. It's in my library, I published it, I patented it, or I open sourced it.
Correct.
So without having an architecture that integrates with the R&D ecosystem and then integrates with actual consumers or customers downstream, this transition won't happen.
Correct.
Right? So you have to mimic what is happening in the successful world of
Yeah.
automobile, pharma, and aerospace. You have to mimic that in the world of small and marginal farmers, micro and small enterprises, and of course, the forest, the land, the water, the nature. Right? Creating that parallel ecosystem requires a full stack approach. So, for example,
Yeah.
if you are inventor in new EV, you will have to think about charging infrastructure. You will have to think about charging standards, but you don't have to think about tires because
Correct.
the automobile industry doesn't think about tire and petrol pump. They only think about internal combustion engine, and rest of everything is either hardware or software, and they can figure it out, right? There's an ecosystem. Where is the ecosystem for water resource management? Where is the ecosystem for sanitation? Where is the ecosystem for healthcare devices, right? And therefore, it was a compulsion for social alpha to start thinking full stack. It was not a choice. So what we have done over the last 8 years, we have built this full stack architecture, which we call social alpha labs, social alpha ventures, and social alpha communities, to make sure that we are integrated from lab to market to community, right? Will it always remain like this? I think it should not. I think it should be replaced by other players. I think over a period of time, social alpha should become irrelevant because as more and more sectors become mainstream, our role will end there, right? And
Yeah.
more people would try to do this early stage risking. So full stack is that. Full stack is in business. Full stack is done by people who want to create closed system like Apple or Tesla,
Hmm.
black box. I want to build full stack because that gives me my competitive advantage,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Now, right now, it is not about competitive advantage. It is about competing with poverty and competing with climate change. That's the competitor here. So, how do
Correct.
you create competitive advantage against poverty and climate change? Through full stack. So, what Steve Jobs and Elon Musk have done, we have to do exactly that for the poor and planet right now, because the competitor is very powerful. Poverty, development, oppression, and inequity. That's your competitor, right? Climate change is a competitor. How do you fight with them? So this is a compulsion to do that.
I want to maybe rephrase and paraphrase what you said, Manoj, so that I have understood correctly, but also take an example so that it's very clear for everyone. So one, what I understand is that today there is a market, like you rightly said, when IIC creates a cell, Roche has an entire ecosystem to say that cell to a drug to a delivery system to a services approach, sales, go to market, everything they will take care of.
Yeah,
Anything that today we care about where there is sufficient financial returns, markets are efficient enough to create those systems.
exactly.
Because it's like पैसा बनाने के लिए है तो मतलब करवा देंगे ना, हम क्यों नहीं करेंगे? But if there is a way where we have to solve for poor, and I'm thinking we need it even more for poor, because for these problems they're far larger.
Yeah,
Today that stack doesn't exist and we have to create it. But I want to
yeah,
explain the stack as I've understood it. One, you're saying that there is an R&D stage, which is the lab stage, which is how do you help an innovator think about, is this the right problem, right solution, is this built well, is it tested, is it patented, compliant, all of that. And once, and they probably sandboxed it to a point where they say, hey, listen, this works on the ground to a certain extent. The second stage is where they have to have some risk capital that can give them the chance to go try it out in a real life scenario where they transform from being an innovation to a company in some form. To say, now paisa liya hai, proof karna hai, I have to pay back something. And then there is the third stage where they have to work much closer with the community and actually adopt it and build the community side infrastructure. If I
Yeah.
use it, who services it? If I use it, who will support me in sales? All of that. Are these the three stages that you are referring to?
Yeah. So these are the three stages, but
Ah,
unfortunately, it's not a relay. You will see in a lot of publications where you see, okay, early stage this happens, then you transition. So it's not like primary to high school to graduation. It's not like that. It's lifelong learning, right? So you have focus on R&D, focus on venture building, and focus on scale up, implementation, scale up. This is the three stages. Identify what is your primary focus in that stage.
right.
However, the work that you do, the iterations that happen, the capital structure that is required is actually common. We have seen
Hmm.
companies requiring philanthropic grant capital at implementation stage,
Correct.
at venture development stage, and of course at the early stage, right? So it is this relay of stage, and accordingly change in the nature of capital and this stage is a big misconception. And only the
Hmm.
entrepreneurs who are building the product, they understand it because this is their daily struggle, right? So I have companies who have actually raised venture capital but need our support to actually do a pilot in the ground. And also in this whole process, you have to actually see if there is a policy obstacle, or is there a policy accelerator that can happen, or a catalyst that can happen, and then go and do some advocacy with the policymakers that look, we are introducing this new solution, it creates impact in the lives of farmers or small businesses or patients, but it requires some support from you, maybe subsidies, maybe market access support, right? Some kind of that. How do you
Right.
leverage government policy, government subsidies? So that continuum is there, right? So early stage grants, for example, government of India has several schemes for early stage grants, but are those
Hmm.
grants really you know enough? No, right? Are they distributed across multiple startups? Of course, yes. Is it
Yeah.
suboptimal? Yes. So how do you supplement that?
And I think that's a very important point, and this comes up in multiple conversations I am part of as well. But one of the points I wanted you to highlight a little bit more, maybe with an example, is this journey is not the same for every innovation. This journey is very, very different. Maybe a health innovation will probably be high on R&D, iterative, etc., and agri may be very different. Can you maybe take two examples of innovations that you've seen where the journeys have been very different for each of these across these phases and not just a one size fits all approach?
Yeah, it's very difficult, and it takes a lot of time,
Yeah.
right? So Voxel Grid, one of the companies in our portfolio that made world's first liquid helium-free 1.5 Tesla MRI machine that basically has the potential to not only reduce the cost of MRI scan but also make it more accessible by making it mobile, and also very efficient and has much higher level of resolution than comparable machines from big players. It started in 2016. Its product development. That means the scientific R&D was done even before 2016. And we are in 2024. And we just got the CDSCO, which is India's FDA equivalent, CDSCO approval for manufacturing last year. It had to go through clinical trials, regulatory approvals. Now, will anybody fund clinical trial or regulatory approval, right? So it's product development, then healthcare is regulated, so you have to go through those steps, and then you have to find partners for manufacturing or go to market, right? So journey can be complex. It requires deep science understanding, like imaging physics in this case, but also the market is large, right? So we actually could not raise money from any financial investor, right? The first investor who actually came after Social Alpha is a corporation. So this can be very long. In agriculture, it's a completely different story. So you can build a product very quickly, but adoption takes time. You build a product, say, in 3 years, 85% or more of our farmers are small and marginal farmers, right? Their land holdings are small. You cannot go and tell them use this product, right? So even when you have built a product, you will have to do pilots. When you do pilots, we have different agroclimatic zones. So some pilot done in Tamil Nadu will not work in Eastern UP, right? Soil type will change, the climate will change, water availability, water table, crop pattern, the crop they grow will be different, the cultural preferences would be different. So you will have to do pilots in those specific small geographies, right? And see whether the product is suitable for the community, right? So this requires risk funding because you are actually asking the community to change something in there, like use a new equipment or use a new method or use something new, and they will use it, and you will have to see whether you are getting the right results before you can ask them to pay for it, right? So you are trying to establish the market, but market is not yet proven. In mainstream world you can get funded for discount and like order from food delivery, you get one plus one free, right? So there is enough venture capital which is available for adoption of B2C businesses. We all started ordering more because some scheme is there, some sale is there or something. There's no scheme for the farmers to adopt climate smart technologies. Not only there is no scheme, there is no lender also. So if I go to a financial services provider and say you are talking about financial inclusion and that is why you have been created, I have these 50 farmers and they are already victims of climate change and we are trying to bring
Mm.
climate smart technology to them, but they will pay in 24 installments, not upfront. Last 1 year we are struggling with the lenders, they're not responding, most of them, right? So now you know what I need. I need to give lenders who are experts, whose existence is about financial inclusion and lending. I am offering them counter guarantees, first loss
Mm.
guarantee, interest
Wow.
subvention to do their business, right?
To a customer they already serve in some sense, which is the
My
farmer.
customer, I have proximity to the customer because a financial services provider does not know how to assess the credit risk involved in. They know how to assess the credit risk in selling you a mortgage or selling me a refrigerator on installment, but they do not understand the credit risk of selling a climate smart agriculture equipment to a small and marginal farmer in Jharkhand. They don't know. And if they know, they would say that my operating cost doesn't allow me to do that business. Even if
Hmm.
they are very digital, they would tell you that no, it doesn't work. And those who are ready, they will say, I want 22% interest or 24% interest. So, the ecosystem is not there to promote a startup. So even if you are a great startup in Bangalore or Pune building agri-tech, but your deployment ecosystem is not yet ready. So the journey is not only tough and complex, the innovator needs to understand it upfront that it will take many, many years and an ecosystem support, right, to get me to a stage where I am on my own or I can
Right.
start seeing. So the growth we have seen in this sector where we operate, right? It's not very well funded, so you cannot have the same growth hacking concept, right? This growth hacking doesn't happen here. It's
Yeah, yeah.
slow, steady, test, pilot. You are dealing with health, you are dealing with agriculture, you are dealing with climate change. It's slow. The non-linearity of impact and the non-linearity of return are interrelated. If
Right.
you really create non-linear impact, you will have non-linear return, right? So it's not low risk, low return, high risk, high return mainstream graph. It's unknown risk, right? And potentially very high return if you figure it out, right? So whoever
Yeah,
figures out a one drop blood test for five things, not Theranos type, but real stuff, that person is going to make money, right? And
absolutely.
this has been proven in microfinance. Unfortunately, microfinance interest rate did not come down significantly. They have come down reasonably well, but microfinance at least is now accessible,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
If you are a dairy farmer with the regular cash flows, you can access microfinance, right? But is it accessible to a farmer for agriculture activities? Not yet. The only loan that is available to a farmer is Kisan credit card. That's the only thing, right?
Mm.
So the ecosystem has to be built, right? You need commercial capital, you need philanthropic capital, you need ability to unlock debt, you need ability to unlock public policy, you need ability to unlock subsidies. And this is what we call blended finance. We don't call what is known in the market as blended finance. In market, blended finance means you subsidize my risk because I cannot take the risk. So you are subsidizing it. No. Blended finance means unlocking various capital pools together
To solve
and
a problem.
deploying them based on the need, stage appropriate, sector appropriate, and it may not be same for all, right? So you cannot wear an investor hat and give money to these people. Because even after you have invested in a company that is building medical devices for primary healthcare in this country is provided by state government through their primary healthcare system. And the procurement for primary healthcare system does not happen from the start, right?
Yeah.
However, globally, around the world, the defense procurement system works. If you are a Lockheed Martin corporation, the US defense will fund you, right? But what about healthcare, right? So you have to build not only affordable solutions with great user experience, you have to unlock multiple pools of capital, including public policy, debt, equity, everything.
Absolutely. So, Manoj, I think the last point I think was the next question I wanted to ask, which is the types of capital, which is really, as you were speaking, I realized that there is just restricted grant capital that says, hey, listen, I don't know where this is going to go. I'm going to give this. There is capital for high risk experiments that also then is, for example, for you to do pilots. There is equity capital, which is that I'm taking a share, I'm committing to the growth, but I'll have an expected rate of return that I'm going to get. There is working capital, which is you need this
Yeah,
capital for a certain period of time. I'm
yeah,
going to give this to you. There is lending capital, which is that, hey,
yeah,
listen, your customer might need lending loans, and I'm going to offer that. All of these types of capital are actually very required. And I think by identifying all of these capitals and finding ways to bring these capitals, and as you rightly said, not linearly. कि अच्छा phase one में ये चाहिए, phase two में ये चाहिए, but
yeah,
across the life cycle, you might just need them in different types and shares and ways. I think is going to be very important.
yeah. And it's not utopian. This is how the world works. So
Yeah,
if you and I start a company tomorrow, we know where to raise grant capital from, where to raise equity from, which bank to go for the loan. So for a mainstream business, this is done. The
yeah,
problem is when you try to solve for poor, when you try to solve for planet, right? The
yeah.
moment you are trying to solve the problems of poor and planet, this larger capital architecture has not been designed for them, right?
And a follow-up question to that, Manoj, is it also because of just lack of governing structures or operating structures? Because I'm thinking social alpha has a certain scale. I mean, an entrepreneur is already carrying a mountain and solving. Imagine them having to resolve all of these problems and then run their organization, solve the problem of the poor, and get the capital. So, what parts of this should an entrepreneur be solving, and what parts of it should institutional structures be enabling? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
So, if you see the history of American banking system, one fine day JP Morgan called all the bankers in one room in New York and said we need to create governance. And the Federal
Hmm.
Reserve Bank of United States was actually born out of that meeting. Elon Musk, while building Tesla, built North American charging standards that now every automobile company in US will have to follow because he was the innovator and primary front runner, right? So a lot of time innovators, entrepreneurs who have this first mover advantage and also the risk they take, they end up doing a lot of this ecosystem building.
Hmm.
The first automobile manufacturer in the world would have thought about wheels and steering, but now you and I don't have to think about it, right?
Right.
Software industries, it has happened, right? The semiconductor industry grew because there were some early movers, AT&T, Bell Labs, and others who actually created Silicon Valley out of it, right? So this whole question of institutional governance, it never starts before entrepreneurship. It always
Hmm.
follows entrepreneurship. So, for
Yeah.
example, If government of India starts startup policy, then every state has got a startup policy, right? The startup policy or innovation policy actually follows startup and innovation. It's not that first policy came and then startups came. Somewhere in
Correct.
the world, people are innovating, right? I think in the sectors like clean energy, right, and material science, in healthcare, as innovators do new stuff, then markets will respond, policymakers will respond, governance structure will evolve. For example, in software industry or ISO or CMM, all these were later, right?
Right.
So, the risk takers, the entrepreneurs, they build the world, right? Historically, right? Traders running around the world, going from one continent to other, innovating all the time, building new stuff. So this building and shipping is very important. Build
Correct.
something, ship something, then regulation will catch up,
Hmm.
right?
There is this
Regulation
phrase
will
called paving it backwards, where they say walk and then pave backwards. You can't first pave and then walk. It's just not going to happen. Hmm.
wait for the ecosystem to respond, then that is a dream. You're
Yeah.
basically creating a dream that if X, Y, Z happens, then this industry will grow. See, look at the pioneers of Indian industry, right? They would have started by building stuff, right? I'm sure when Jamshedji Tata built Taj Hotel, there was no hotel management school in this country, I'm sure. Or TCS or Infosys would have struggled to hire software engineers when they started their journey. Or even the regulations, right? So, for example, internet happened, and then a lot of data security and all these acts and rules about privacy and thing, because internet had to happen first, right? So, I think uh, governance, organization, infrastructure, ecosystem is very important, right? But the need for an airport will happen after someone is actually talking about building an aerospace industry about, around.
Absolutely. Two follow-up questions, Manoj. One, and both usually come up in our conversations with potential funders. One is, hey, government already put so much money on innovation.
Yeah,
Why am I also putting grant capital?
yeah.
And this is a question. And they say, then why are we? Is it a leaking bucket problem? I don't know how do you see in the continuum of capital conversation the role of the government and the role of rest of philanthropy?
I think the rich and privileged of our country need to understand that
Mhm.
the tax that they pay is not enough for a country of our size and the complexity of problem, whichever regime it is, whichever party is in the power. There
Right.
is not enough money, right, for science and technology innovation. We don't have something like DARPA with a large budget doing moonshots, right? And also, the government money is very suboptimally distributed. Government does not act as a capitalist doing resource allocation where Darwinism work is working in giving grants, right? It will have to go. For example, a government scheme would be that let's build 100 incubators, let's give 5 crore to each, and let's see how they perform. That's distributive nature of equity in policy
Right.
making. Markets have excellence in resource allocation. Markets would put resources most efficiently, right? And therefore, the rich who have surplus to deploy need to allocate capital to innovation because they can allocate capital in a very different model than the state would do.
Mhm.
They can use their venture capital, private equity type of knowledge to create a new category of capital that is willing to take the risk that the venture capital doesn't take, but still using the operating model of resource allocation that the venture capital does, right? But adding a level of specialization to that, that okay, if I am investing in battery as a startup, it would be a different playbook than I am investing in a medical devices startup, which would be a different playbook, right?
Right.
This level of thinking requires one specialist in the sector, to the capital that is willing to take long term risk, and it cannot come from this typical LPGP model where you are managing other people money.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why impact investing has failed to do this? Because impact investing was using the same playbook as the mainstream investing. There is no
Yeah.
difference. Same 220 model, fiduciary responsibility. The only thing was, okay, we will also create the impact, right? The model that works, and I am really, I don't take names in the conversation, but I'm very impressed with Nitin Kamath and Nikhil Kamath, right? Brain matter.
Hmm.
That is the model. Their own money. They created a pool of capital, and in several of our companies, they are investing. They are investing their own money, right? And for example, in social alpha, if I ever build a fund in social alpha, I will take money only from people who are giving me to manage their money and not in a typical LPGP structure, right? But in a structure where they believe in our resource allocation capability, our due diligence, our innovation curation, but not expecting a 8-year 20% IRR. That model will not work here because you are taking very high level of risk, right? You are creating new markets. So we have seen the best investors in this sector are people who have money but have empathy for solving the problems that people and planet have today, and are willing to live with suboptimal return compared to the risk we are taking.
Right.
We have situations where we invested in a sewage treatment STP company, and we got co-investment from Rainmatter, and a philanthropic organization created for philanthropy has refused to put money in that company as grant, right? So you see the difference. A VC that is raising money from others with a promise of return will not take that risk. So you have to think little more philanthropically when you are creating the market. However, the later investors, if the product is really successful and later investors come and there is a growth, everybody else will get paid. So last year we had an exit of almost 4-5 crore rupees in social alpha. Not because we planned for it, because some of the companies managed to raise more money and became attractive to the corporations, and we got. So exit in this case will be a really good situation so that we can recycle this capital for the same cause, right? But incidentally, because you are taking very high risk, right? And some of these entrepreneurs are doing fantastic, we are sitting on a 5x return. This 5x return is not because of our talent or our ability to pick the winners and invest the money in that. This 5x return is because we have taken option risk. And markets have accidentally rewarded us. So nobody
Right.
gets a bonus because we made a 5x return in social alpha, because it is not, it is just because you played in a market structure where nobody was taking a risk and you took the risk और आपके पत्ते लग गए तो आ गया,
Right.
right? And you worked hard, you tried helping these companies with grant money, you helped them in building their product, you helped them with the pilots, you took them to, you did everything. But the credit actually goes to people who actually brought in money in the company, right? Who, the entrepreneur who took the risk without the money, right? A lot of credit goes to people who are actually building and shipping. We are just enablers here. We have to do because nobody is doing it. If others do it, we will stop doing it. But entrepreneurs need lot of support.
Yeah. Yes, I was thinking as you were talking that the mindset for assessing indeterminate risk is different from the mindset of assessing high risk. And I'll explain to you what I mean. Like when you said, oh, this enterprise has worked, and that doesn't mean we've cracked it. That just means, we just got our cards. And on a tangent, I was once in a Vipassana program where, in the Vipassana program, they tell you nothing is permanent, right? And by day 5, once you go through the program, you get a sense of, wow, I've now cracked the Vipassana breathing technique. And they say that will also not last. So it is an indeterminate state and not a state where there is logical progression. And because when you do some things like this, sometimes there's a mindset to say that, okay, 4 of my enterprises have succeeded. I've cracked the code. But the code cannot be cracked. It's an indeterminate risk problem, I think, is a very important thing. And I think the second reflection I had as you were speaking, and this is probably my bigger summary, is sometimes we build a mental model on how something works and we force fit all our thinking to fit that mental model. कि mental model अभी linear है. We say that I'm going to do R&D, then I'm going to do testing, then I'm going to do market, and then I'm going to scale, and then I'm going to do returns. And that's our mental model for innovation. And so everything that we imagine is because of this. And I think what you're forcing us to say is that, listen, the mental model is actually different. It is
Right.
a blend of various things at different stages where things are running in parallel.
Yeah.
And unless we build the vocabulary for that mental model, unless we actually understand that things here are not a linear model,
Yeah.
that there is indeterminate risk and there is a different type of support that is required in different ways, we will not build the structures that we need to make this happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very, very
Exactly.
important. way for anyone who's investing in innovations.
This whole concept of uncertainty, iterative nature of product building and shipping, changing context, changing climate change, right? Now weather predictions are going wrong, right? It doesn't rain when the prediction says it will rain, right? Including in some of the countries that took pride in forecasting rains and drought, they can't do it anymore, right? It's not working, right? So this openness that if A plus B was C, not necessarily next time A plus B will also again be C. And therefore accepting and living in that randomness is very
Very, very
critical.
important.
And the financial investment models today do not model that risk. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. In the last part of this discussion, Manoj, I just specifically want to talk about the role of CSR and innovation. And I think this is important for multiple reasons because sometimes people think of money as money. For me, CSR is corporate's way of engaging in the innovation ecosystem beyond what they do in their own regular businesses. They bring a certain interest, and a certain level of capital to do this. But today, all the data tells us that the innovation investments in CSR have been very low. Like we are talking about 0.3% of all CSR money being spent on innovations. You've had a chance to work with companies today. Where do you think are some of the frictions in innovations and corporate CSR capital coming together?
See, most of the corporates who have CSR budgets are big listed companies, mostly, right?
Ah, of course.
And they are used to quarter on quarter reporting, annual reporting, and all that, right? And the business model is based on they know their product or services and they know their shareholders. They are already working with a cadence, right? And orchestrate. They know their business inside out, right? Now, unfortunately, innovation is not as predictable as you say that this month target is 20% growth and then we achieved 18. Let's increase the dealer commission and all that, right? Innovation is unpredictable, right? It's risk taking and it requires a lot of trust, right? So when you have a CSR project and you say, I want you to distribute 60 computers in 5 colleges around Bangalore, it's a very easy thing to do. Procure, distribute, give a proof of distribution, and you have created impact kind of thing, right? But when you are funding innovation, the willingness to fail, that this year's annual report probably will have very short paragraph and not many visuals about our CSR, right?
Right.
Nobody likes failure.
Correct.
Number one, you cannot deliver results in short term. And number two, failure may happen. That I think is a deterrent, right? And the R&D head of that organization doesn't run the CSR.
Correct.
Who understands, probably the only person who understands innovation life cycle and has probably some field project as well as funded by their
Mm.
share. And corporates don't like to talk about failure. They only want to talk about success because it impacts their market positioning, right? So, if you want more money from corporations to flow into innovation through their CSR budget, we have to address this issue at the highest level that you have to set aside some money in your CSR budget that you can just give as a grant to the organization that is going to manage innovation for you. This is one. Second thing that we have experimented and done well, that with our CSR partners, we do not go to them for our upstream work because we know they're not yet ready for that. So hopefully you guys will be able to convince them to give us money for social alpha labs. But we go to them when we are deploying. Because when we are deploying and doing pilots, we can give them in less than 1 year what they need. If you see our CSR project, they will be more towards deployment side where we have a product and we are doing pilots, right? Or implementation or market access, right? So all our CSR projects are with companies which are at a stage where they are ready to go to market or
Right.
doing clinical trials or doing regulatory approval where we can show progress, right? Unfortunately, while building the product, and if the product development takes 2 or 3 years, it will be a trust-based philanthropy, and therefore, uh, a part of CSR money has to be set aside, which is just given as innovation grant, right?
Correct.
Part of the CSR money can go as deployment grant, which can give them short-term results, which meet their expectation and their shareholders' expectation. But there are some progressive corporations who have understood the regulation very well. So they have
Hmm.
given us money for deployment as equity capital, which is the most
Hmm.
difficult thing, right? That can you take money in CSR project and deploy as equity in a company that is ready to take equity money? That is a much higher level of enlightenment that the corporate CSR teams have, but we have had some success there as well. But yeah, maximum CSR money in our case has gone into our downstream work and not in the upstream work. And regulation allows. It's not that it's prohibited by regulation. So it's basically space for people like you in Satwa to convince the CSR boards and CSR heads of companies to set aside money for innovation. Because if there is no investment upstream,
Hmm.
today upstream there is only one investor, and that's government of India. And that, because there's so many, and upstream funnel is also big, right? So as you start building the product, right, that is where you have large number of companies, right? And
Correct.
towards the downstream you have a smaller, narrower funnel because mortality is very high. So upstream money actually gets distributed to many incubators, many academic institutions, right? And therefore not enough. Downstream, by the time you are at a stage where you are testing and have early results, you start seeing some traction in the market also.
Right.
Some traction. Not yet there, but some traction.
Yeah. No, and I think the two divisions that you highlighted is very interesting. One of the, hypothesis that I also had is that unlike a lot of other countries where a lot of R&D investments are actually, or innovation experiments happen in academic institutions, we have standalone labs, CSIR, etc., which are largely quasi-government run. They have government leadership, etc. Really smart people, but in a way isolated from the talent pipeline that we build as a country, which is college work, etc. Do you think that is also contributing in some sense for lack of interest among companies and others, or in general collaboration difficulties in form?
No, we have been able to collaborate with CSIR as well as ISRO, right? So CSIR NL, we have a great partnership with them on aerospace and defense space. With ISRO, we run a program on space tech. So I think we have some of the finest institutions in the country. The
Hmm.
problem is that they are not yet integrated with the startup ecosystem, which we are trying to
Right.
do. They are already integrated with the larger players.
Hmm.
So I'm sure if there is a big aerospace company in India, they know how to deal with an air and vice versa. We are trying to see that. I'm sure there are national labs who have licensed their technologies to many big corporations. But we
Hmm.
are seeing how can we build this parallel ecosystem where innovators and startups can also work with them and use the
Right.
infrastructure, right? For example, our IITs, IISc, CSIR labs, all of them have world-class infrastructure. They have labs, they have equipment, right? Can we get access to that? Because these labs and equipment were built with your and my tax money, right?
Yeah.
Right? It's public asset. India's large investment in R&D infrastructure is publicly funded, but it's in lock and key. It's behind the locks, behind the several level of security and passage, right? How do we open it? That entrepreneurs who are building the future of India, how do we get them access to publicly funded and publicly built and managed infrastructure? So some of the institutions are very open. Institutions who say, yeah, our gates are open. If you have a startup, bring them in, we'll open our labs. But somewhere you will have struggle. I think one of the things is that India's R&D ecosystem has no prior experience of hiving off or spinning off startups. Then, with incubators being built in educational institutions, that process is started, right? So now incubators do this; they hive off. But if you go to an institution and see what the incubators do in terms of value addition, right? Can we increase that? Can we work with the incubators, cherry pick some of the best innovators there, and provide them additional support that
Yeah.
incubator may not be able to provide? right?
Hmm.
So incubators have done amazing work, right? They have like laboratories, they have funding, they are able to raise money from private sector as well as government, but there is still that missing link, right? They are not full stack, right? So we go and work in partnership with all the incubators, and in the process, we have built our own 3 or 4 incubators in the country. The idea is to have incubator as one of the Lego block of this architecture,
Correct. Correct.
right? So this architecture is like, you know, more like modular, where you have R&D ecosystem, incubators, accelerators, small investors, big investors, corporations, but somebody needs to orchestrate this whole thing. And this orchestration is not required, and we don't think it is required, because in mainstream world this orchestration automatically happens
It's
because
taken
the
care of.
incentives are aligned, right?
Correct.
The incentives of all the suppliers in a mainstream business are aligned because they're all working for the same piece of revenue, right? Here, how do you align incentives in development sector, right? A
Yeah.
large number of players who work in development sector are non-profit. So
Correct.
aligning incentives in the non-profit world is a big challenge, right? So how do you, therefore, the need for full stack and then creating an example for that.
One other question, Manoj, that I often hear from CSRs is there is a unwillingness to support for-profit organizations, and some part of this is just mental model thinking. Yeah, for-profit, matlab profit ke liye hai. Why am I using philanthropic capital? And that I think is only a question of journey. I mean, I am a for-profit organization myself. We have gone through this journey of convincing people that we are impact focused. But I want to flip this and be a devil's advocate, Manoj. Raising capital is always hard, and when you know some type of capital is easy to get, even as an entrepreneur, sometimes it's easy to say that, listen, I have a technology that can solve problems for the poor, but the same technology can solve the problems for a larger market and raise more money. Do it. Do you see there is a risk of mission drift also in for-profit organizations sometimes, where after a point they're like, listen, I've run this fight, I've got the capital I need at the innovation stage, but for me to go have breakthroughs, maybe a certain level of mission drift will just help me unlock larger capital solving a different problem for a different set of people.
So there are two things here, right? One is that mission drift is overly highlighted in case of people who are working on the impact space, right? The mainstream business also gets subsidies. They also get access to grant capital. They get very cheap land when the state governments attract them. They get tax holidays. We don't talk about mission drift in that case, right? We only talk about mission drift in poor innovator who is just starting off, right? So
Right.
to be very honest, when they're trying to solve the problem and the problem is not changing, likelihood of mission drift doesn't happen, right? If somebody solves the problem of clean drinking water at an affordable price, and then that clean drinking water is also available to rich and privileged, this is not mission drift. UPI being used by a rich person is not mission drift. But UPI was designed for the right context for the poor, right? You can actually make a payment frictionless. You don't have to stand in a queue in a post office or a bank. You don't have to pay an intermediary. You just can use your mobile phone and transfer money from one account to other account. This is the greatest example of social innovation in our country, isn't it? Now, a
Right.
rich person can, I'm sure a rich person can also use UPI for its convenience. And if somebody does a wrapper around UPI, makes it even more user friendly and additional services on the top of it and charges people, it's okay. Right? Solving for the poor and planet and creating that market, making the product affordable, accessible with the right user experience. After that, its adoption can scale, right? Right. If you have a one
Mm.
rupee test or a 10 rupee test for tuberculosis that can be done very quickly, let everybody enjoy the benefit of that. See,
Right.
innovation does not, if you innovate for the rich, it will not reach the, it took mobile phone 30 years to reach poor, right? But if you innovate for the poor, it will reach up. Context appropriate innovation will always go. So on one
Mm.
hand, you have mobile phone that took 30 years to become 10 rupees ka recharge and free data and 5,000 rupees a smartphone. It took 30 years, right? However, UPI took what, 6 months, right? So yeah. So who are you innovating for? That's very important, right?
Excellent.
Yeah.
I just want to maybe end with this point that you made, Manoj, in two ways. One is, listen, CSR money has two places. You can come into deployment, you can come into labs, and maybe roles for organizations like Satwas, even just to be able to frame this for organizations to say, ये fixed deposit है, or a working capital, liquid loans type thing here. And where do you want to look at liquid loans, or do you want fixed deposit? And and it is a capital that is the most patient. CSR does not have to really report quarter on quarter outcomes. Everyone, the self-imposed stress can be removed. And I think roles for us as intermediaries is to be able to highlight these categories, frame the risk returns for each of them, and then tell them that there is really no external compliance norm that stops you from doing one of the other things. It's really attitude and mindset.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I'd come back to the question I asked earlier, Manoj. As you're solving this problem, if you had a wish list of things that you thought should be in place at an ecosystem level, what are some of the things that you would say, hey, we should probably build this? If India builds three, four things for everyone, for like 10 social alphas and thousands of innovators, maybe this entire journey will be faster. What would your wish list be for such three, four things that we need to build as a country?
Okay, as we build more products, science and
Hmm.
technology-based products, they cannot be built on a screen, right? Like software
Yeah.
products can be built by 10 people on cloud, but these products require infrastructure, labs, right? So my wish list number one would be, can we make our national labs or our regional labs, which are funded and exist from public money, can we make them more accessible and more affordable to the startup? Our
Right.
incubators, because all of this has been publicly funded, but they need to stop rent seeking, right? And
Hmm.
they need to open it, right? People are Startups are not going to destroy what has been built over last 75 years. They are going to use it and make it better, right? We have provided free education to people, right? We have provided subsidized food, education, everything. We have not
Right.
provided innovators and entrepreneurs that level of access. And this access has, maybe it's there, but it has to be very transparently published and propagated, right?
Correct.
Two, domestic philanthropy. The rich and privileged in India, they need to allocate capital for innovation. And we have role models who have done this. We need more domestic philanthropy to write unrestricted capital for innovation. Like people like Nitin Kamath, Chris Gopal Krishnan, they have really done this, right? So it's not that there are no examples, but we need more.
Yeah.
Three, corporations through their corporate CSR, they need to think little more pragmatic about innovation. They need to understand that taking an innovation from technology readiness level 3 to 6 is also positive impact.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Investing in a startup in climate change is a positive impact. Deploying a solution in a primary health center is also a positive impact, right? So innovation life cycle has to be funded, right? And last is that we need to unlock non-grant and non-equity capital also. It is not about grant and equity. It's also about subsidies, market access support. It's also about debt. And I don't know,
Hmm.
that seems to be a much bigger problem. We have not yet started doing anything about it, but we have to solve the problem of debt because our startups, our MSMEs, our small and marginal farmers, they have one problem. None of them have access to debt. This is the wish list.
Manoj, this has been a super phenomenal conversation where we've, I think, covered a lot of ground on innovation. I'm going to do my best to just summarize the entire conversation and then leave it for the audience. Number one, I think we started by why. Why is innovation required? And I think what we are clearly saying is that places where market failure happens, where every human's deserved rights of clean drinking water, effective productivity, good health, good education, is important for us to solve for. It's not a question that we should ask whether we should solve for it or not. I think the fact is that government cannot solve for it, and we need innovations to solve for it. And I think that articulation is very critical. We talked about the four challenges in terms of mindsets, capacity, capital, all of that in there. Then, secondly, we highlighted how our current mental model for innovation may be not the mental model that will help us solve it, which is innovation is not a linear journey. Number one, innovation is not where different people work at different parts of the value chain. It is intermingled, it is iterative, it requires different forms of capital at different points of time. And understanding that structure is going to be very important. And as you highlighted, oftentimes the first entrepreneur is paving it backwards for the rest of them to do it, like Elon Musk in terms of building charging standards. Third, the role of CSR in this is actually huge. They can actually deliver money. Today, there are two pockets. while there's greater willingness to support the deployment related capital that is available where short returns are possible, annual reports look okay, there are these long-term capital investments that can be make a significant difference. But having the mindset, being able to think of it as my fixed deposit investment in some sense of CSR, I think is going to be important. And I think the point that you made that infrastructure for innovation is very necessary. It will be a different problem if we didn't have it. But to have it and lock it and make it not available for people, I think is probably a crime when we are solving problems like this, especially when they've been built with public capital. So, how do we unlock infrastructure? How do we unlock domestic capital? How do we unlock CSR? Are essentially going to be big levers for us to be able to solve this. Manoj, you've been wonderful. Thank you so much for your time.
You have summarized it so well. I'm going to just note it down and use it. Right. Uh, One thing that probably comes to my mind that historically we have been trained in thinking binary,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And we have to start thinking spectrum in whatever we do.
Correct.
In politics, we are already thinking spectrum, right?
Correct.
In for profit, not for profit, we need to think about that. In sexual orientation, we need to recognize that. So I think increasingly people need to think that it's not black and white. There are multiple colors. And therefore, the risk management models that investment community uses need to be recalibrated, redefined for development sector. Development sector needs risk capital, but it needs risk capital on its own terms. That playbook will not work in this, and that is where dissatisfaction will come from investment community. Oh, these guys don't deliver. No, these guys don't deliver because they need a different type of capital, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then you can make development sector more innovative and put it on a non-linear scale.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better. Thank you, Manoj. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It's really good to talk to you.
Thank you for listening to Decoding Impact. I am your host, Rathish Balakrishnan. If you liked what you heard, do check out the Sattva Knowledge Institute website, where we speak a lot more about innovation and the CSR's role in the innovation landscape. You could also check out the season 1 and season 2 of Decoding Impact on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube, or wherever you actually consume your podcast from.